Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for making time this afternoon for this conversation. My name is John Updike. I'm the president of Open Primaries. I'm very excited to introduce all of you to the team at Common Ground Arkansas, which is a new organization with big ambitions to improve the political, the legislative, and policy environment in Arkansas. With us today is the founder of Common Ground, State Senator Jim Hendren, as well as the executive director, Misty, and board member, Veronica. And before I welcome them and begin our conversation, I wanted to show you all a very quick video that Common Ground put together to introduce themselves to the people of Arkansas.
I've been involved in politics in Arkansas for 50 years or more, and I've never seen a partisan divide the way we have it now in Arkansas.
Unfortunately, I think that we've backslidden a bit here in recent years. Government of the people is of all people.
The partisan labels can matter in a campaign, but when you're elected to serve everybody in your district. Some of my most meaningful legislation in the House I sponsored as a freshman Republican with a very senior Democrat. Today, that would be unheard of. Today, bipartisanship is frowned upon and sometimes even punished. And that's hurtful. That's hurtful for the people back home.
We've forgotten how to build relationships and respect one another's differences when those differences are so key to us being able to find the best answer to our problems.
I think that is terrible for our state, and that's why I've gotten involved with Common Ground to try to do something about that.
We're going to focus on our commonalities, the common good for us as Arkansans, as American citizens, rather than focusing on what in my experience are relatively few differences.
The politics of our bigger country at this moment are polluting the soil, and it's up to us to make sure that the soil here in Arkansas is healthy enough to grow the future that we need.
We're not going to get it right on the national platform until we get it right here at home.
It's not about finding these litmus test issues that divide us. It's about finding leaders who are willing to work across, even though they may not agree on some of these other issues, to move Arkansas forward.
Growing up on the farm, one thing you have to do is every day you're faced with a new challenge, a new problem, and solving those problems is incredibly important. The same is true in politics.
We can find common ground here in Arkansas.
It's such a great video, and thank you for making it and introducing yourself. My first question is for you, Jim. In the last year, you have done some pretty ambitious things. You founded Common Ground earlier this year. You also left the Republican Party to become an independent, and you're now the lone independent in the state legislature. What's that been like? What's it like to be an independent in the legislature? And what is it about Arkansas politics that led you to make that move and also to found Common Ground?
Well, John, thanks for having us and letting us tell our story, because it has been quite a journey. And, you know, I have been in the legislature for about 16 years, but I had a 10-year gap. So I actually started way back in the late 90s when the Arkansas legislature was overwhelmingly controlled by the Democrat Party. And now it's, of course, flip-flopped the other way. So I've seen this huge transition. But what's really changed in Arkansas is the partisanship. It has gotten to the point where that defines us rather than is something that we use, as I said, in a campaign. So, I mean, we've gotten to the point now where it's almost dysfunctional. We've gotten to the point where it's about winning and beating the other team versus winning for the state or winning for the people of Arkansas. And we put so many barriers in place that make it so hard to accomplish the real issues and tackle the real issues because we're so busy throwing red meat to the base that we become dysfunctional. And as far as my journey, you know, I've been in the Republican Party my whole life. I was the majority leader for 4 years in the House and 4 years in the Senate and the president of the Senate. So it was a hard thing to abandon that to become an independent. But when I saw January 6th and when I saw leaders of my party standing on the steps doing Stop the Steal rallies and just denying reality, that was the final straw for me. And I said, at this time, for me at least, it's time to take a different approach and try to restore some of the civility and decency and bipartisanship that was here 20 years ago when I came to the legislature. And as far as the journey, I will tell you, I got a call from the only independent in the California General Assembly about a week after this news broke to give me what his experiences were. And it's been very similar. He said, take about a week for the shock to wear off, and then you're going to find yourself feeling incredibly liberated. And that's really how it's been, because this was at the beginning of the session, and we saw issue after issue after issue that I had my former fellow Republicans voting for out of fear of a primary that they knew were bad legislation. And as an independent, I'm like, I don't have that worry anymore. I just do what I feel like is right. And I think that is so liberating, and it's so needed in politics to have legislators who put just doing what's the right thing first above the political issue. So I'm not going to say there's not been some challenges, but for the most part, it's been overwhelmingly a positive experience.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. And Misty and Veronica. So Misty, you're the executive director of Common Ground, and Veronica, you serve on the board. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be involved in this process, and what you're experiencing in your outreach and your conversations with your fellow Arkansans.
Veronica, why don't you tackle that one first?
Absolutely. So I'm actually a native Texan, but I've been here in Arkansas for nearly 17 years. I came here for my job in the corporate world. I'm an attorney actually for Walmart. My undergraduate education was in political science. And so when I was back home in Texas, I was quite involved in everything from voter registration to even serving as an intern with a state senator before later going to law school. Like many people, began to transition and focus more on my family and home life and growing a career. But again, after living here in Arkansas for now nearly 20 years, the words that I shared in the video were very true as far as we've backslidden a bit. Things, in my opinion, have gotten worse, not better. And I think a lot of that is because we're not getting it right on the national platform. Yet at the same time, I'm a very big believer in grassroots efforts. What we've seen on the national platform does not just happen overnight.
Right.
It starts in our own communities. It's the local and state politicians who then become our national politicians and those who represent us in the national arena. So, now that I'm a little bit older and wiser and an empty nester, I have, my time is though still precious like everyone else's. This is definitely that season in my life where I feel that I need to engage in the community where my child grew up many of her young years, and I need to give back. And if there are things that I don't like, then I have to look in the mirror and ask myself, what am I doing about those things? Jim and I were actually introduced through mutual friends, some actual conservative friends who I met through church. And I've been an independent most of my life, and have always been a split ticket voter. And so met up with some folks through church who actually previously were very involved politically in the Republican Party, actually served here in the state of Arkansas. But we often, over the last few years with everything going on, have had a number of discussions, very open, candid discussions around race relations, around economics, around everything from voter registration requirements to even what's going on in the corporate world as far as what appears to be a glass ceiling that applies to people of color, because this is a corporate town. And so we have a lot of those very robust discussions. And so they introduced us over coffee, and the rest is history. And we've hit it off and have been brainstorming and sharing ideas and thoughts and what we might be able to do ever since.
That's great.
Well, I want to say we have the best board, and I'm so grateful that we have Veronica and Archie and Mark that you saw in the video. Like, we have a really wide swath of, diverse ideas on our board, Arkansans from different walks of life who all kind of come together and help us find out what those kind of commonalities are and how we can work forward. So I'm really grateful to Veronica for all she's doing for us. My background is in journalism and community development. Then I started a project where Jim and I got to know each other called Arkansas COVID, which was tracking COVID data from kind of a non-partisan lens in Arkansas, because it was kind of hard to do that, right? Because COVID became so politicized. And so that got Jim and I talking about, the way that we can bring people together to look at things outside of that partisan lens. And that's natural for me. My mom is, she's gay and she votes straight D ticket all the time. My dad is a Free Will Baptist deacon and he votes a straight R ticket all the time. And they are both wonderful humans, right? And so, like, how do I reconcile that? And how do I recognize it? At their core, like Jim and I, we do not agree on a lot of issues. I'm far to the left of him, he's far to the right of me, but we have some very core values that are the same. And we both want good governance in our state. And we think a lot of people share that. And so that brought us to talking about how can we take what we believe and what we know that most Arkansans actually want and broaden that out in a systemic way that we can make a change in our state and in our politics.
One of the things I loved about the video that you put together is this image of tending to the soil. Of bringing people together from left and right, from urban and rural, from liberal, conservative, black and white, to pay attention to the soil. And that's something that gets almost no appreciation in American politics. It's all about the football game. It's not about the soil on which you are playing that game. And I wanted to ask all three of you, so what's it like as you're recruiting people and involving people and expanding this common ground conversation? Do people look at you like you're crazy? Do they want to get involved? Is it both? Is it neither? What's the experience? Because you're not doing politics as it's supposed to be played.
Well, I'll just say the word that I've heard more often than any other word since we began this endeavor is hope. And so many people have said, finally, we have some hope that there's a path forward to change some of what we see. Everywhere we go, we hear that. There is a lot of people waiting to see if something like this can really succeed. Up here in Northwest Arkansas, we have very strong business communities, the home of Walmart and J.B. Hunt and Tyson. So there's a lot of industry up here. And I think that industry in particular has begun to realize that just continuing to dump money in the right for tax cuts is really being counterproductive to so much of their other efforts.
Interesting.
And so we're trying to help them understand there is a way to fix some of this situation, some of this circumstance, but it's not going to fix itself. Right now, the trends are set and it's going further and further to the right. And there's really not much to push back against that. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of people hopeful that we'll succeed, counting on us to succeed. We've had a lot of support in financial support because people believe in what we're doing. And I tell people 2022 is going to be pivotal for us. If we do what we set out to do and make the changes in 3 or 4 seats in the Senate and 5 or 6 seats in the House, the entire dynamic will change in the Arkansas General Assembly. And we've got me and several other former legislators on our board, and we understand how to do that. Now we just have to go out and get it done.
One of the things that's so cool about Arkansas is the size of our state. We're 3 million people, and we have like around 1.8 million registered voters. So what we're doing here is building a model that we hope is applicable in other states as well, but it's the perfect place to kind of test this because our market is very small.
Yeah, and I want to kind of slightly buck the system a little bit and disagree with you, John. I believe this is the way politics is supposed to be played. It's just
Yes,
not.
supposed to be,
And
definitely.
exactly. I mean, this is a country where when we were founded, right? So you ran for president, number two became your vice president, which to me is very telling about how things should go with respect to politics in this country. And thinking back on some of the things that Jim and Misty said, just as passionate as I feel about, for example, again, race relations, which honestly is how Jim and I initially connected around the lack of a hate crime bill in the state of Arkansas, which is important to me, not only because of race, but because my daughter is a member of the LGBTQ community. She is a bisexual African-American woman who's in a relationship with a white woman who identifies as gender fluid. You can imagine what it has been like for them in their relationship. At the same time, things that are basic and as fundamental as some of my colleagues here who've come here to be a part of the fabric of corporate America, walking down the street and having racial epithets yelled at them, that being a very real personal experience for them. But then when you look at it from a business and a corporate standpoint, I will tell you, businesses are now struggling to have people of color, very talented people of color, move here. And it's impacting them from a talent sourcing standpoint. I've even had people who are not of color, people who are maybe of a Jewish heritage or other heritages, who want to live in a welcoming, inviting environment, who have some trepidation about moving here. It gives them pause as well. And is that what we want to be known for? Is
Right.
that how we want to raise our children? And is that how we want to navigate the workplace with our colleagues? And so being able to have those discussions are very important. And I know, Jim, you and I had very, very, very transparent conversation about, the soil, right? And talking about the fact that, Jim, with your granddaughter, right? And the fact that being a young Black child, nobody's going to care who her family is, right? Nobody's going to care. And this is what her life is going to be like if we don't do something about it.
Thank you, Veronica. That's wonderful. A couple more questions, and then we're going to open it up to the broader audience. And just a quick reminder, if you want to ask a question, just type your name and your state in the chat, a one-sentence description of what you want to ask, and then I'll call on you directly to ask your questions. We'll open it up in about 5 or 10 minutes. A quick follow-up. So, Jim, you mentioned that 2022 is pivotal. Give us kind of your Cliff Notes overview of kind of what are you focused on in 2022. And I also know that you're involved in a fight to challenge the legislature who's trying to change the rules of the game regarding ballot referendums. They want to up the threshold to 60% from 50%. So tell us about that, and give us your broader vision for the next couple of years.
Well, you're right. The legislature is continuing a pattern of what we call gathering power to themselves, and it goes contrary to what the traditional culture of Arkansas is. I mean, our motto is Regnat Populus, the people rule, and part of the reason that you're seeing these issues to draw back the voter power is because the voters continue to pass things that an overwhelmingly conservative, Republican, I would say far right legislature opposes. And it shows you how out of sync that this message that we're having in Little Rock is compared to the people. Some of the examples of that, the people through the initiated act process raised the minimum wage in Arkansas. There is no way that would have made it through the General Assembly, but the voters did it. The people did medical marijuana, same thing. And then the legislature almost refused, even though the Constitution requires us to implement it. The people implemented term limits, and I'm not a big fan of term limits, but it's another example of something that the legislature is tired of the voters passing these measures. And we tried to do redistricting independent commission to make that more fair. But there is a continued pressure of the legislature to usurp power from the federal government, from the executive branch, from the judiciary branch, and now even from the voters. So that goes contrary to everything common ground is about. So we're going to continue to get involved in issues like that. But our strategy and our tactic for this for 2022, you know, one thing that if you look at the 2021 session and compare it to the 19 session. Now, the 19 session, I was the president pro tem, and you may know my uncle's the governor, Asa Hutchinson, and then we had the Speaker of the House, Matthew Shepard. And between the three of us, that session really was able to kind of avoid going off the tracks on some of this red meat issues. We did a lot of things. We did raises for teachers. We did a highway program. We did a lot of things to education-wise to try to improve Arkansas. And we were able to keep most of the crazy stuff in committees and not let it just completely overtake the session. So what happened to make 21 different was we lost two of our traditional Southern conservative Democrats in South Arkansas got beat by far-right Republicans for one reason, and that's because they had a D by their name instead of an R, and this is a Trump state. And I've served with both of those guys for a long time, and they were as good of legislators I ever served with. Well, they were replaced with far-right, and this tipped the balance in the Senate to the point now where there was no stopping some of this stuff coming out of committee. I don't care who was the pro tem and who was the governor. So that's why this last session was dominated with issues that really distract from real problem solving. So that's why I try to help people understand we don't have, right now there's 27 out of 35 are Republicans and me an independent and 6 or 7 Democrats. We don't have to win 10 seats or 12 seats. We have to win 2 or 3 of the problem causers, because the legislature is full of people who follow, believe it or not, the people who make the noise and the people who write the bills. And all we have to do is take care of it, and we know who they are, the 2 or 3 people who continue to incite this stuff, and others vote for it out of political cowardice or fear or political reality or whatever you want to call it. That will stop, that will change the entire dynamic of it. And so we're focused very specifically on where we can win, and the wins will make a difference in both the Senate and the House. And we've got a good idea. We've got a good strategy. And that's one of the beautiful things about not being a party is we can pick and choose a strategy that suits us. If we want to run an independent, we can. If we want to support a Democrat or a Republican, we can. We just want to find people who are going to behave like grown-ups and govern with civility and decency and bipartisanship. And I think we're going to, again, it hasn't been tried before, but I do think there's a real opportunity. You all probably know, because of the census and redistricting, every legislator in the entire General Assembly is up for election, which only happens every 10 years. There's new districts with no incumbent at all. So there's a huge opportunity. We just got to deliver.
And to Jim's point, I mean, as you know, you guys work in the broken primary process that we have puts all the pressure from the extremes. And so common ground exists to balance out that extreme end pressure and put pressure in from the center, right? From moderate, where most of the people of Arkansas actually are.
Yeah, and I would add to that, you know, Misty and Jim, that we also have to consider the fact that we have a growing population in the northwest corner of the state where we live and reside. We have a lot of transplants from other parts of the country, like myself. And we have a challenge with them relocating here and maybe not initially registering here in the state. So sometimes the outcome politically does not really reflect the views of the people who are living in this community. And that's something we definitely have to focus on here in the upcoming races.
You know, going back to the primaries, I was doing a little research about Arkansas. I was somewhat stunned to find out that Jim, in the legislature, 56% of members don't even have an opponent in the general election, which is like one of the highest rates of non-competition in the entire country. I'm just wondering if you see a relationship between that and the effort by the legislature to, you know, as you put it, gather more power to themselves. I'm not looking to connect things that aren't connected, but it really struck me about that lack of competition.
Oh, I think that's a cause and effect correlation. There's no doubt about it. You know, one of the reasons that we were so excited to hire Misty is because she's so good at going and gathering data like she did for Arkansas COVID, and now she's doing that with election return data. And as she looked at the returns across the state of Arkansas, I was surprised. We've got one senator who's never gotten more than 9% of the registered voters in his district, in his entire district's vote, because it was a low turnout primary and then no opposition in the fall and no opposition in future primaries.
Wow.
So you've got a senator down there who's been a state senator for 10 years and never gotten more than 9% of the registered vote. And that's the only 9% that senator cares about satisfying, because if he right now, the elections are determined in primaries in many of these districts. We're going to find ways to change that. We're going to look at some structural reform to primaries, because as Misty said, I cannot tell you how many times I've been on the floor of the Senate and had my colleagues come up to me, Republican colleagues, and say, this is a horrible bill, but I got to vote for it. I'll get beat in the primary. That's where we want to have common ground to say, there's another side to that, and you may take some heat and find yourself in a heated race because you vote for stupid bills. So we're going to begin to put the pressure from the center that there really just isn't. The business community tries, but they just are not very effective at it.
Great. One last question, and then I want to open up. We have a lot of questions that people have for you. So you guys have been now developing kind of this multi-pronged strategy, supporting candidates that are going to govern sensibly, working and exploring these structural reform issues, looking at redistricting reform, things like that. What do you want the national reform movement, the primary reform community, what do you have to teach us as you go through this process?
Well, I believe there's a huge opportunity in Arkansas in particular, and I do think Arkansas is a great model, as Misty said, to be used in other areas if we find a strategy that works, because the media market's relatively inexpensive to get on the ballot. Although there's some roadblocks, it's fairly easy. I think until we have some structural reform on how we elect our candidates in primaries, it's going to be hard. It's going to be fighting uphill until we do that. So that has to be one of our number one goals at a state level and at a national level. And I would, to the national folks, I would just say, we're going to try here in Arkansas, and that, it's going to take resources and it's going to take effort. We understand that. But I also know that this is the long game, and we're going to work in the short game in 2022 to try to win with the rules as they are today. But if we want to really win long term, it's going to take some structured primary reform.
And I would also say to the national folks, like, there is no one size fits all approach that is going to work in every state in the United States, right? Like, I feel like on primary reform, you have to look at what works with that particular electorate, what's going to pass, what is implementable in that space that's going to have the most impact, and let the people who are on the ground help you make those decisions, knowing their electorate.
Any last words, Veronica, or anything on that?
One thing that I will say is I'm very grateful to Common Ground Arkansas. It gives me a platform and an opportunity to have a voice and to truly speak from the heart and the mind on certain issues. And what I mean by that is, quite often there are preconceived notions about which party someone may be because of they're of a particular gender, they're of a particular race, they're of a particular fill in the blank socioeconomic status. And some of us just don't have a political home, and you almost feel like a political refugee. And I don't mean that to be disrespectful to that. I'm just sort of using a play on words here, but truly, you feel like you have to choose sides when this shouldn't be about sides. This should be what's right for people, what's right for individuals. And so we should be able in this country to have adult conversations about political views and not view this as a situation where I can only bring myself or my people up if I trample on the rights of or stomp on the necks of others. It's not about that. And so being able to be a part of this group where we do have some disparate views, but our core values are primarily the same. That has been very refreshing. I can be someone who is a Black woman who serves on a church board and works in corporate America, but who's the proud parent of someone who's gay. And that's all okay. And none of that is incongruent, right? And so I really want to see some things that are focused on rights, on economic growth, and that are focused on making sure, again, as I said in the video, that we're representing all people and not just certain people to the detriment of others.
Great, thank you. All right, the questions are lining up. We're going to start with Margaret Kobos in neighboring Oklahoma. Margaret's a political reform advocate and activist and has a question about messaging. Go ahead, Margaret.
Hi, I just want to thank you first, Open Primaries, for making it possible for us to connect, because I would never know about Common Ground if you were not doing this today. It really means a lot to us and all of the subscribers for Oklahoma United for Progress. So we kind of appear to be, I've gone through the Common Ground website. I've learned a lot. I love it. It's a great resource. Their message is, if we were on parallel train tracks, you couldn't get any closer. And I find it interesting. We share a lot of economic cross-pollination, and we have a lot in common, especially northeastern Oklahoma and the Bentonville, Arkansas, Fayetteville area. And we enjoy that. We love it. And what works for Arkansas, I feel, is going to be really helpful to us in this reform world. So my question is, I have a lot of questions, but number one, I would love to follow up with Common Ground in person, one-on-one, if possible, after this, because I do have so many questions that I think are relevant to our region. I would like to see us connecting with people in Kansas and Missouri as well, and really kind of trying to work together in a regional approach to reforms like open primaries. And so my question really is about open primaries and primary reforms in Arkansas. And Senator Hendren was talking about their path for that. I wondered if he could be a little bit more specific about how he plans to strategize and what their current system is right now.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be glad to. And obviously, I live about 8 miles from the Oklahoma border, so we're not that far. We'd love to visit with you in person or directly anytime. But there was an effort 2 years ago to put ranked choice voting on the ballot in Arkansas. And it was struck from the court because of partly because they wanted to. It's a partisan court, like a lot of state Supreme Courts are. But they found a loophole of the law with regard to how background checks were done that we have since corrected. But nevertheless, if there was value in that, it showed us what the opponents of primary reform are going to do. And it was very clear what their strategy was. It was, this is out-of-state billionaires coming in here to try to take away control from Arkansas, and we're going to not let them have, that was the message. And Senator Cotton had already raised a lot of dollars and began to make that communication strategy known. And I think that's very telling, because when we do this, if there is value to an organization like Common Ground Arkansas being the vehicle for something like this, they're not going to call us out-of-state billionaires. As Misty said, our board is from all over the state of Arkansas. It's leaders in almost every industry, former legislators, bankers, farmers, attorneys. This is a group that has credibility in Arkansas. And I do think that's going to be very hard for them to dismiss, as they have tried to do previous efforts. The other thing I would say is, Misty and I have traveled the state, and we've pitched different types of primary reform across the state. And as Misty said, it is important. There's places where ranked choice voting, exactly as attempted in other places, may be the model. And there's places where something different. Because of the spin that's going to happen of the New York City thing, that's already begun to circulate in Arkansas, that you know, it's a debacle, it can't be done, it's too complicated. We believe here a simpler primary reform approach is more sellable and will have, if not as much, almost as much impact on the ability to find center lanes for more moderate candidates. So we're looking at top two is basically what we're looking at, because right now, as I said, 80% of the races in the Arkansas, from the constitutional officers down to the JPs, are determined in Republican primaries. But if you change that situation where two people have to stand before the entire electorate instead of just the Republican primary base, it just so changes the dynamics. And I can point to race after race after race in Arkansas where the outcome would have been different under that type of scenario. Plus, it's just so much easier as we've gone across the state to help people understand that. And the nice thing about that too is you can vote for a Republican for governor and a Democrat for U.S. senator or for state senator under that type of scenario. And people like that. It appeals to them in Arkansas. So that's kind of the one that we feel like would have the most traction. We've polled it. It polls passable. It would pass, and even after the communications attack that we know would come, a well-funded effort, it would be successful. But there's no question that it's going to be fought, and there'll be court challenges, and we're going to have to, you know, do a first-class effort if we're going to win in the end.
Right.
Did I miss anything, Misty or Veronica?
I would just add that, you know, like a lot of organizations maybe that come to implement primary reform in a particular area, they may be looking to try to give one party or another a better shot at winning or gaining seats. And that is not our goal. Our goal is good government. That's all we care about, and we don't care what party brings it. So we're able to come at it from a really even perspective, just down the middle of what's actually going to be best for the voters of the state, not necessarily what's going to give one party or another an edge. And so that's our end goal.
Yeah,
Do you feel like, go right ahead.
No, I'm sorry. The only thing that I was going to add is, you know, what Jim and Misty were just describing, I think is going to lead to more of what Jim has modeled in the Senate, which is bipartisan sponsoring of bills and collaboration, because by changing the way the primaries work, it's likely going to force more of those discussions across the aisle.
All right, I want to throw it over to Kevin Miller in Wisconsin. Kevin is a leader in Veterans for Political Innovation and has a question about the role of veterans in these political change efforts. Go ahead, Kevin.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so actually we just had, last night we had a launch event for the efforts to get open primaries and final five voting implemented in Wisconsin through the group Veterans for Political Innovation. We had a great turnout. We had representatives and senators at the meeting from both parties. We've got actual legislation in the that's been introduced, bipartisan sponsorship. But we're playing a little bit the long game. We're knowing that we need to lay that foundation and build support around the state for it. So that's the approach we're taking. I'm curious, especially from Jim, what his thoughts are as a veteran, how that's impacted his outlook and his decision to become an independent, and how he is maybe looking to leverage veterans, and in part because we know that people have greater respect. They're more willing to listen to veterans. And all of us who are veterans, I think, wonder, it's like, well, there's nothing special about us in a lot of respects, but we know that. And how can we leverage that? How are you looking to do that in Arkansas?
Well, thanks, Kevin. And I appreciate what you're doing and your service. And here's one of the most fascinating things is, and because Misty did such a good job of rolling out my announcement to change from a Republican to an independent, I mean, she insisted that we do a first-class video, and because of that, it got some national attention. And the amazing thing was, I heard from my buddies that I served with 20 years ago that I hadn't heard from in years, calling me so proud of what I had done, because as you know, so many of us are so offended by the thought of our U.S. Capitol being under siege. And the guy with his feet on Nancy Pelosi's desk is literally from my hometown where we're sitting right now. And so it was especially offensive to me as a veteran. And then what was even more offensive to me as a veteran was when I saw, and I think, again, this is why it struck such a chord with members who spent a lot of time in the military, to see people who knew better. And this was, I mean, people in my old party, Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, standing up and basically promoting stuff they knew to be untrue and in literally putting democracy at peril. That was a huge impact in me as far as the decision to say I could not stay in a party that tolerated that and that had leaders who behaved like that. And I think a lot of that is because of my military, background. And that's why I heard from so many of my brothers and sisters that I served with over the years. But I do think there's a huge role for veterans to play. I'm glad to see other veterans organizations getting more involved. I do think the independent streak that Arkansas has is shared by many in the military, and it kind of takes that to do some of the things that military is asked to do. So there is a lot of accord and a lot of commonality with particularly military veterans and what we're trying to do, but the support's been outstanding.
Great, thank you. A question from Dr. Jesse Fields in New York, a question about voting rights and outreach in Arkansas. Go ahead, Dr. Fields.
Okay, well, thank you, John. Thank you, all three of you. It's great to hear about what the work that you're doing in Arkansas, really inspiring. And I really, I'm glad that we are having this conversation, and definitely we, support what you're doing. My question is around the issue of voter suppression, and which is a big issue, deservedly so. One of the things that I think we can talk about in our efforts to change for structural reform is the impact and the opportunity of nonpartisan elections, of open primaries, to allow everyone to vote, to give everyone equal voting rights and more choices, because you can vote among all the candidates. And that, of course, is very important in terms of history and the legacy of the leadership of the African-American community for equal voting rights, and bringing all people together in support of equal voting rights. So I wanted to ask you if you could talk about what is happening, what it's like, and what your feedback is so far, what the response is to your efforts to bring people together and to do outreach in communities of color, among young people, in gay LGBT communities, which, the conversation that we're having makes me think of all those communities, and our efforts to bring people together in support of everyone being able to participate and really reforming the whole process.
Well, I'd just say, like a lot of states in the South, there were several pieces of legislation this last session that I voted against, and were guised as voter integrity issues, but would have had the effect, without doubt, of voter suppression. And we had a lot of controversy over some of those. One of the most egregious was to completely eliminate the last day of early voting, which is one of the most popular turnout days for people, and people love early voting in Arkansas, and the idea that we were going to restrict it. There's been partisan handover of some of the oversight of the election to more partisan entities than our nonpartisan entities. So we've been through that in Arkansas. It's a continuing trend. It is something that we were somewhat vocal about and would be more engaged in the future, because, again, part of our core value is voter empowerment and not voter suppression. And that means not making them have to have a 60% threshold, while the legislature just needs a 50% legislature threshold. And that means not making it more difficult, in fact, but encouraging people to be able to vote, and to be able to vote in as free of a method as we can come up with. So that's something we will continue to engage in a very public way.
And like, if we were to look at the systemic part of that too, like, how do our current processes make what you're talking about happen, right? Mm-hmm. And so what's happening here in Arkansas with our current primary system is it is easy to ignore those people, right? If you do not fit into the little far right Republican box, they don't care how many people email them or march on the Capitol. You're not voting for them, it doesn't matter, right? So what Top 2 does is, Top 2 open primaries does, is it forces people to coalition build. And, you know, I see some comments and I hear this all the time. People are like, well, if you've got a strongly Republican state, then you're just getting more Republicans in office. It's just the top two are going to be Republican and Republicans going to win or whatever. But again, we don't care what party people are from. We care about how they govern. And we are not going to just drop a system onto this state if we're successful and then be done. We are going to drop a system into this state and then work to find candidates that are going to be the types of candidates that can, you know, have a real impact and change things, right? So let's say you have a far right Republican and then a moderate Republican that get the top two, you know, and go to the November election, then that forces those folks to coalition build and to listen to all of the people in their district, no matter their color, no matter their religion, no matter their, you know, gender identity. And that's not something that's happening right now. It's so easy to just ignore voices that aren't the ones that you care about. And so that's one of the things that makes us excited about Top Two in Arkansas, is that coalition building part of it.
Thank you.
A question from Laura Marsh about the role of voter education and voter registration. And then I want to throw it to a question after Laura from Arkansas, from Brenda Gullett, about some recent moves to give county commissions more power. So Laura, why don't you start it off and then we'll go to Brenda.
Okay, thank you. I'm also from Arkansas. So, you know, I've been watching recent events and I've seen how it looks like Pulaski County is going to be split up with the new apportionment with the census. And so I wondered, you know, down there, if there are some efforts to do increased voter registration. And I also live in Northwest Arkansas, and I know that I think voter registration could be really important up here too. We have a lot of college kids that are not registered. But along with that, I think it's really important to do voter education along with that, because, you know, again, there's just so much misinformation. And so I just wonder if there are any plans for that, for any of those things to happen. Thank you.
Well, I mean, obviously, all of those things you discussed, we agree with. I voted against the redistricting plan because it was clearly counterproductive to do what we did to Pulaski County and for partisan reasons. But as far as voter education, get out the vote effort, you know, all of those things help what we're trying to do. But, you know, as Kevin knows, military guys are kind of tactically driven, mission oriented. And right now our mission is to win these legislative races and focus on making a difference for the 23 session. All of those things will help, and particularly in the districts that we're engaging in, we will have some very robust education and communication efforts, as well as registration efforts. But our bandwidth, you know, you have to decide what you can focus on and spend your effort and energy on. A statewide voter get out the vote effort, there probably will be some organizations working on that, and we will certainly support that. But you know, again, we're going to be laser focused on making a difference in the races that will matter in the next General Assembly, in a more surgical approach probably than an entire statewide get out the vote effort. Did I phrase that correctly, ladies, Misty and Veronica?
Yeah, I think Jim's point that we're very tactically driven right now is a good one. And we hope to, you know, be around for a long time and to be able to broaden that as we grow.
Yeah, and Laura, with that redistricting, it makes it even more important for us to make sure that we can identify really good candidates who can win, and who can bring people more to the middle, so that we can effectuate that change in Little Rock.
Thank you. Brenda, you had a question about what's going on with the county commissioners. Go ahead.
Okay, well, good afternoon, and thank you so much, Senator Hendren, for what you have done and are doing. And also Misty, we just had a close eye on Common Ground Arkansas and continue to be so delighted with what they're doing and how exciting to have the whole country on this call. I know the senator has probably voted against this, but they're talking about changing the primaries, which would be so positive. And then it seemed that there was no end to voter suppression tactics during this last session. and even down to giving county commissioner, election commissions more authority over the outcome of elections. And I just find that reminiscent of Arizona and other places, you know, where they never did give up on what the vote was. So I hope, and you don't have to take time to answer this because I think you've talked a little about it, but I hope there's going to be some effort to even go down to that macro level of what's being done to discourage voters in Arkansas.
Well, first off, it's good to see you, Brenda. Brenda and I actually served in the legislature a few years ago, and in a bipartisan way, and I enjoyed getting to know her very much when she was in the House. But you're right, Brenda, there was some awful legislation that came through. I mean, even to the point of making our city elections partisan. Right now, they're nonpartisan for our mayor's races and our city council races because of political filing fees and partisanship. There was legislation introduced. Now, this didn't pass, but it will if we don't change the trajectory to make it even more partisan. And as Brenda said, the party in charge then wants to assert authority over the auditing, oversight, appeals of elections. We even had one bill that's going to give the legislative peer committee the ability to review some of the outcomes of these elections, which is absolutely ridiculous to have the legislators reviewing their elections. But we've absolutely seen some awful legislation. I hope I voted against. I think I voted against all of it, but you never know. I probably did. But it was hard to keep track because there were several bad bills, as there were across the South and other states, that are designed for one thing: to give more control to the party in charge and to win at all costs. And certainly that's something that we're going to continue to work against.
Well, and the sponsors of that type of legislation get big O targets on their back from Common Ground. I mean, that's like voter protection. It's a huge part of our platform. And that's something that we'll be scoring legislators on, how they vote, and especially if they're sponsoring stuff like that.
All right, we've got 5 minutes and 3 questions. So I want to do kind of a lightning round here. And before I do that, I just want to give a quick shout out to Archie Schaefer III, another board member at Common Ground who's on the call. Say hello, Archie.
Oop, I had you on mute. But yes,
welcome to the discussion. Just wanted to say welcome and hello.
Happy to be here, and this is important, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, great to have you. Okay, I want to go to let's keep everything short. Jeff Solomon has from Florida, a question about electing independents to office. I want to go to Brandon in Arkansas, who has a question about something you said, Veronica, about bringing people to the middle. And then finally, I want to end with Sarah Smallhouse in Arizona, who has a question about primaries in general. So start with Jeff, then go to Brandon, then to Sarah. Go ahead, Jeff.
It's pretty simple. I've wondered if more NPAs or independents like the senator got elected around the country, whether or not that make a difference in creating more inclusion and all people voting. Just curious as to people's thoughts about that and where it may be getting done. And the real trick, though, is if you do it entirely independently with no, support of significance, I would imagine it's near impossible. But are there organizations? Does this organization or people in this organization or this forum that are involved with others have the capacity to get behind that and create or participate in campaigns of people around the country who may be interested in doing that?
Well, I do think there will be more and more of a path for independence, and I agree with your question that it will increase voter turnout. One of the reasons I did this, have been on this journey with Common Ground, is because my 4 adult children from age 22 to 34 don't feel like they have a real political home right now. And they would be so excited to have an independent with a breadth of a different perspective than the traditional far right or far left that they could support. So I do think that is the case. There are some limitations as a 501c4, how much we can specifically, get involved in an independent or anybody else's race. But and we believe I know there will be some independents on the ballot in Arkansas, and Common Ground is going to absolutely try to run interference and make a path for them to be able to win. Complying with all the laws on what a 501c4 can do. But believe me, there's a lot that we can do to make the path for a credible independent to win. And there are certain races where in Arkansas it is possible.
Thank you.
Okay, Brandon had a question for Veronica. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yes, thank you. You had mentioned you were talking about bringing people more toward voting in the middle rather than the extremes. And I'm trying to understand what exactly the middle looks like, because my experience of so-called moderates tends to be more like of a toned or like a sort of diluted version of actually having any values, where, like, for example, one thing that I think most Arkansans probably have in common is that we don't especially like people needing to have abortions, and we would like for them to not need abortions. But rather than trying to control their bodies to get that done, why are we not looking for candidates who are going to actively fund Planned Parenthood and make evidence-based sex education available for everyone, and ensure that there's going to be affordable housing and living wages, and that people are not taking their newborn babies to drop off in the baby box in Fort Smith that we apparently have, because they don't have the resources to be able to care for their children. If we're actually pro-life, why do we want to elect people who are in the middle about what it means to actually support life?
So I'm one of those moderate. Hold on a second. Sorry, I have to go to another meeting, but I'm one of those people who is in the middle and who is a moderate, and would absolutely, you know, despite my own personal views, support funding pro-life. Actually have a dear friend who's actually on the local board. And so what I'm talking about is avoiding what Jim was describing earlier, that deep entrenchment in being a Republican, being a Democrat, and regardless of the issue, regardless of how one really feels the issue should be decided, saying I'm sticking to towing the party lines regardless. I'm not even willing to have a discussion. There's no way I am voting for someone who has a D or an R next to their name, regardless of the issue and the real moral stance that I might want to personally take. That is very counterproductive. So I'm definitely not trying to at all promote something that's sort of washed down politics, but just a forum to where we can agree we're going to have an open dialogue. We're going to listen with open minds, open hearts to the issues, and really try to think about what is good for the citizenry of the state, even sometimes, right? To the extent that it may not be what I think is best for me, but what I think is right for the people. I don't think that those things are in conflict. But in my mind, when we're too far on either extreme, you're always leaving someone completely out of consideration. And that's just not a healthy dynamic.
Great. Thank you. Final question, 2 minutes left. This is Sarah Smallhouse in Arizona. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, thank you. So one of the arguments that I have heard in Arizona is that partisan primaries were a solution to party caucuses. And that is used as an argument against going to open primaries. It would actually have the effect of making things more extreme. I don't believe that, but I'd like to know if any of the panelists have a pat argument to come back with on that.
I mean, we've only had caucuses in very unique situations in Arkansas where there's a vacancy and there's somebody resigns from that's running for the election or something. So caucuses are something that really is never even part of the discussion in Arkansas with regard to nomination of candidates. It's just always been the primary process. The only question has been really the last time we had a big fight in Arkansas about this was when we went to nonpartisan election of judges. And that was 25 or 30 years ago. But outside of that, people.
So Arkansas never had caucuses ever.
Well, I wouldn't say ever, not that I'm familiar with. I just know right now that both parties are terrified of primary reform because both parties, particularly the Republican Party, more so than the Democratic Party, because they're in power and they see that as a threat to the power structure. But usually when something's opposed by both sides, there's probably some real validity to it. And again, when we poll this, it will pass in Arkansas.
Thank
Great.
you.
All right, thank you, everybody. This has been a great discussion. I'm sure we could go on for another 2 hours, but we have to end here. One quick announcement before we go, and I think this is very germane to our conversation today. On Monday, October 25th, a partner organization of ours, Independent Voting, is going to be having a national virtual event, the Anti-Corruption Awards. It's the 20th anniversary event. It's usually in New York City in person. This year it's virtual and national. And they're going to be giving awards to a number of political innovators, including actually to Jeff Solomon's comment about supporting independent candidates, a gentleman, Farhad Mohit, who started something called the Good Party, which is an effort to support those independents all over the country. So you'll be getting an email invite to this. It's in the evening on the 25th. It's going to be a great event with lots of news and information about what independents like Jim and others are doing to challenge the political status quo throughout the country. So expect that in your email. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Misty. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Archie. Keep up the great work. Thank all of you for coming and participating in this conversation, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.
Thanks.